All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. We are live, looking at tonight's two-game slate. Two games, I say, because FanDuel and DraftKings are, I'll go with lazy. It would take a little work to set up multi-day slates, but at this stage of the playoffs, there's just better contests. You can run 4 and 5 game slates that go 2 days. You run just as many slates. You can still run this single-day stuff, chop at 50-50. But the big reasons not to do that are the turnover, which isn't as important a reason as having a quality product, and in theory news would be trouble. You know, that's already a mitigated factor in the playoffs. Might be an issue for tomorrow night's slate, looking at Wednesday's game, because you don't know if Embiid is going to play, and that's a pretty massive slate. But when the slate starts at 8 p.m. tonight, are there really any questionables tomorrow that would hurt you? Especially going into the playoffs, there's usually a lot less uncertainty. So it's unfortunate we get donk slates, but that's what we've got. Some massive prize pools, or so I am told, on our 2-game slate tonight. So let's get into it. Let me make sure we are live and do the retweeting, the bidness. Questions are coming in. Yeah, if you are watching me, following me, listening to the sound of my voice, go ahead and tweet me any questions or leave them in our premium Slack. Apparently Dudley will be out. Okay, that's a bit of news. It seems likely that Jared Dudley is not going to play, and he played 28 minutes in that first game, so that does open up a fair bit of time here for a number of guys. You're going to see some of that go to Karis LeVert, who can get beyond his 23 minutes. That's exciting for him. Obviously, the center minutes are a big deal here. In that first game, we obviously only got 10 minutes of Jared Allen. I'm still going to just stay away from him in his entirety in the event that Joel Embiid plays. I expect Joel Embiid to try and play, and this is obviously sort of the main decision on the slate. He spent most of the slate until Steph went off on the 4-gamer the day before yesterday as our highest overall scoring player on the slate, and it's important to point out that that was a little bit of bullshit. Not to say that he isn't incredible, but he's hobbled and had about 2.5 fantasy points a minute on one leg in just 24 minutes. So I'm nervous. The price on DK is obviously appealing, and no one at center on FanDuel projects terribly well. So obviously we're still going to have a lot of interest in the big man this evening, but him playing 24 minutes again and scoring 38 fantasy points wouldn't shock me. That's 1.6 fantasy points per minute. That's around what I have him projected for if he plays 24 minutes. So definitely that's going to be an interesting decision point, but it's good to see them start already rolling out the news on Dudley this far in advance. Hopefully we get some additional news. Before we get into depth on that game, the other day I gave a couple people shout outs for some exceptional performances, and the first 2 days of the playoffs, as expected, have gone extremely well. So shout out to Awesemo member Hollywood, who made him like $8,000 yesterday. Good job. David Ballard, that's Big Dave 24 on the Twitter, pulled down a cool $30,000, putting up 320 last night. And that wasn't easy last night because there was some real shit there. It's not easy, but you know what they'll give you if you do that? $30,000 for Big Dave there. And a couple days before that, egregious pricing, that's at CrossCouple on Twitter, won himself $11,603. It's the $3 that makes it sexy. You can get yourself some nice church-going socks for those $3. So those being a couple of people who lamented not receiving their appropriate shout-out. I apologize. It's not a standard part of the show, but more than happy to call those out who are fortunate enough to finish high in the money. Iguodala. So we're going to sort of freeform this. I got, a full hour to talk about 2 games, so we'll just bounce wherever you guys lead me. I like Iguodala. I don't think I would end up with a lot for a couple reasons. One, on FanDuel, I really like paying up more than that at shooting guard. I like Jimmy Butler a lot, even at the FanDuel price. I like Lou Williams a lot. DK has reacted a little bit. He's still too cheap. FanDuel didn't move him an inch. Still way the hell too cheap. I still have him projected for north of 40 for 6,700. That's really good. Yeah, so hard for me to get away from Klay Thompson, who's, just also well too cheap, especially on FanDuel. Jimmy Butler, Lou Williams. So I like Andre Iguodala, but FanDuel, there's not much of a cap tonight. There's some decent value. All the nets are a little bit too cheap. So a lot of people are leaving $500, $1,000, $1,200 on the table, I've seen today. So running Iggy out there doesn't seem like something that would happen for me in a single lineup. Plus, the steal block upside isn't always as high as we've seen. Plus, to some degree, some of those minutes were an artifact of them going old school and lapsing into the Hamptons 5 because of the foul trouble and booting of DeMarcus Cousins and eventually Kevin Durant. So I'm fine playing Iguodala. He's got an upside. He's going to be the most relevant. He's man 6 on this team. He can run out there at the 2, 3, 4. They can do all kinds of stuff with him. But on DK, where you're stuck with the score, and there is a real floor there. I mean, even in playoff games where he plays 30 minutes, he occasionally has 14 fantasy points because he takes 4 shots and doesn't happen to pick up any steals and blocks in that game. So I wouldn't have that much Iguodala, I don't think, just by a factor of the way it's structured on FanDuel and the fact you kind of get stuck with him on DK. That being said, I'm certainly not pushing against him. Taking a step back, I did a Periscope, 2 or 3 days ago, discussing the playoffs and the differences between regular season NBA DFS and postseason NBA DFS, and it's important to keep those in mind. But today, those are far less important than reacting to the crowd overreacting to a one-game sample size. That, in every sport, whenever you go into the second week of NFL, or the second games for baseball or basketball in the playoffs or anything, the most important thing is that people look at one game and overreact to one game. So, as an example, right now, we have Steph Curry at like 60% ownership. I like Steph Curry just fine. I'm not upset with any amount of Steph Curry you might wish to play. 60%'s a big number. Again, yesterday was, money printing. It wasn't very hard. You just don't play Jaylen Brown. See, that wasn't hard. And we got that one right. So again, you can boil the show down into a 15-second soundbite that would be, play guys who project well and didn't happen to play well in their game 1. That's sort of what I'm saying here. So leading that hit parade, Spencer Dinwiddie saw 32 minutes, which is the second most minutes on the team. This is a good matchup for him. In this matchup, especially if his Embiid is out, I would project him for a little more than a fantasy point a minute. He costs $4,900 on FanDuel, which is egregiously cheap. He costs only $5,000 on DK. He's going to be low owned, and I have him projected for more than 30 fantasy points right now. That's good for a guy who costs $5,000. And there is upside beyond that. He saw 50-point games repeatedly this year. Dudley being out helps him, as they are sharing time off the bench. I'm a huge fan of Spencer Dinwiddie. I gave him an A in cash and an A in tournaments today. One of my overall favorite players. Lou Williams is just too cheap. It is a great matchup for him. Several of the other guys on the team deal with more difficult to nightmarish matchups. It is I've been a big Danilo Gallinari fan the entire year. Literally, I talked about him maybe more than anyone else in this damn industry, where I was like, look, this guy keeps doing this, and if he stays healthy, he's a really underrated basketball player, and was pretty good the entire year. In season-long fantasy, he was literally about the best player to have. There were a couple better, Pascal Siakam obviously overperformed by a little bit more. We won't go into that whole spiel right now, but I've always been a big fan of Gallinari. This is a nightmarish matchup. It's terrible. And they pay really close attention to him. So, and there's no chance that he gets switched, or it's rare, he gets switched over onto Curry, which is really the only I'd like to be guarded by that guy matchup. Although he's got, some movement on the step, depending where they're positioned against Cousins in theory. But, it's a tough spot for Gallo, and that just makes it an even better spot for Lou Williams primarily and secondarily Montrezl Harrell. Let's see. While we're talking about these guys, I'm going to be a giant fan of Jared Allen in the event that Joel Embiid doesn't play. Not enough people are going to play him. He will immediately fall into a very plus matchup, and not enough people are going to play him. And 6,000 on FanDuel is fine. Everyone in that price range is going to play Boban, and I have no issue with you playing starting Boban. Don't get me wrong. In one lineup, I would play Boban. But you're going to get Jared Allen at, 8% owned as opposed to 40 on a 2-game slate, or I'm probably getting both those numbers off a little bit, but the idea obviously still holds, and it's not going to be necessarily a bad matchup for him at all. So I'll want a lot of Jared Allen if Joel Embiid is out. Joel Embiid, again, I'd be under the field today, and again, was really, really over the field when they played over the weekend, and he was 18% owned and was a key piece to winning the slate. You weren't going anywhere without Steph and Embiid in your lineups, and I'll be fine with you playing Joel Embiid. He could play 30 minutes instead of 24. There's a monstrous upside. He could play 24 minutes and put up 58 fantasy points again. Very, very likely. They have no one to guard him. And it's worth pointing out, he played really poorly in that game. Like, he actually had a bad game. He shot, I want to say 5 for 15. Let me find that game log. I have it loaded somewhere around here. Yeah, 5 for 15 in that game. That's not good. But the 5 blocks is a bit of a weird artifact. Had the same 15 rebounds Steph Curry did. It's a little more dependable when it comes out of Joel Embiid. Obviously gets the big double-double. But if he starts, and that news comes out anytime in the near future, like if the news comes out that he starts at 7:53 again, no, I'd probably want to go over on Joel Embiid because you're just going to win the ownership game again, and that's pretty valuable. But if the news comes out at 7:25 that Joel Embiid is going to play and start, the ownership's going to go from the kind of ridiculous 18% it was at last game. It's going to spike up to 30. At that point, I think I come in a little bit under that number. He's obviously not 100% healthy. I don't think even in this matchup, especially when not healthy, he averages 2.5 fantasy points a minute. Yeah, that's the easiest way I can explain that. I'm, again, not going to have any issue with anyone playing any amount of Joel Embiid. It's Joel Embiid, and there is money to burn largely. But, certainly I think we could all agree he's the first guy to the bench if the game gets out of hand, right? Okay. I think we could also agree he's at a greater than average risk of leaving the game due to an injury or soreness or something, right? So there's just enough ways that it can go wrong and enough other guys I like where, yeah, I think I would end up under there. Again, we are waiting on news and commentary, and I have all sorts of alerts and other things open, and hopefully we will know what we know earlier than we expect. So let's talk about the sort of the front court rotations there. Again, was a pretty big fan of Ed Davis for last show. Didn't expect any kind of performance what we got, and that is over his head. FanDuel, I'm still going to be a big fan of his if he plays under any circumstances. He costs basically nothing. He is a droppable guy with a big ceiling and a good matchup. No problem. DK, again, it's a one-game sample. That's a big game out of Ed Davis. And he's probably going to get you double-digit rebounds again today. And, having Jared Dudley out certainly doesn't hurt. That feels pretty good. But, he's not etched in stone super productive guy. I'm still very interested in being over the field on Jimmy Butler. Piles of minutes, played 39 minutes in that last game. Just too cheap on DraftKings. Just way too cheap on DraftKings. I'm really interested in being over the field on Ben Simmons. Look, everyone is talking about how shitty Ben Simmons is. He's, what is it, $7,400? I can't remember the price. It was so ridiculous it got knocked out. He's $7,300 on DraftKings. Now, again, everybody's way the hell too cheap on DraftKings, so you have to adjust to the new normal there. but I still have him projected for like 42, 43 fantasy points. And there is really a ceiling beyond that. And then if you take Embiid out of there, or Embiid plays less, and there's just more time on the court without Embiid, I'm much more comfortable going to Ben Simmons than I am going to Tobias Harris or going to JJ Redick. They both have evident problems I think you can see coming. They're both very much in play because they were shit game one, and people are going to overreact to game one. But I do think, like, say, Gallinari, that those issues are unsurprising and would pursue in most games. That doesn't mean they're not out of play. If you get JJ Redick at 10% owned on a 2-game slate, that feels pretty good. That's still very much in play, but I do think he will fail most times. This being opposed to, say, Spencer Dinwiddie, who's coming off a bad game for no apparent reason. Got, again, the second most minutes on the team, played 3 more minutes than D'Angelo Russell, or 2.5 more minutes than D'Angelo Russell, played second most minutes on the team after DeMarre Carroll. So I guess that's the important differentiation to make there. He's just going to be my favorite guy again today. Maybe he'll find a way to fail again. People are sending me messages. Let me react to some of these. Simmons or Curry on DK? Well, Simmons is $1,500 less. For some reason I'm having trouble remembering all the prices today. 15. He's $1,500 less. So why not both would be my answer. But if I'm building one lineup today and I can only play one of those two guys in tournaments, I would play Ben Simmons over Steph Curry for that reason. I have Curry projected for well more, although slightly less points per dollar. I have Steph Curry projected for a touch under 50. I have him at 49 and change, I think. That's an absolutely fine number. But I have Ben Simmons for a touch over 40, and at their prices, that I think he actually points per dollar works out just a hair better. And he's going to be 14% owned as opposed to 60. So, yeah, in one lineup, I'm going to play Ben Simmons. Nothing wrong with playing Steph Curry, but at a certain point you're trying to win a tournament here and playing, all the guys who went off game one. So let's keep dancing around here. Let me take a look at the ownership projections on DK as of right now. And again, you can get access to these yourself by becoming a member here at awesemo.com. Number 1, 55%, Steph Curry, tied with Klay Thompson at 55%. I'd much rather play Steph than Klay. Klay is fine. It is not an ideal matchup for him. He gets switched well, covered well by these Clippers. You can obviously play him. I like him more on FanDuel where he's well cheaper, though even on FanDuel I have him, as far as my level of interest, probably still behind Butler and still behind Lou Williams. But I like Klay Thompson a lot there. DK, where you're stuck with it, this is a spot where I project him for just a touch over 30, which is fine. And he's a guy who can obviously go off and give you a 60-point upside. Feel free to play all the Klay Thompson. If he's going to be 55% owned, no, I'm not going to be anywhere near that number. I would much rather go with DeMarcus Cousins, where there's just a much more evident path to upside. The Clippers obviously went small for a pile of that last game. Zubac played, I believe, only 10 minutes or so, similar to Jared Allen's style. It was like 13, but played very little. Montrezl Harrell got the bulk of the time. Cousins got in foul trouble, and they intentionally were going at him. Getting him in the pick and roll is one of their big keys to success. So he has an evident floor. Now, that last game was about as bad as it's going to get. He's almost always going to see more minutes than that. He's almost always going to be more productive than that. And there is a massive ceiling, and he's really priced into it. So I slightly prefer DeMarcus Cousins to other guys in the price range. I prefer Butler. I prefer Simmons. I slightly prefer Cousins to Draymond tonight between the two of them. I like Draymond a lot. It's a good matchup for him. But last game, the issues with Cousins gave him slightly unnaturally high ceiling. No issue with you playing him. 61 on DK, perfectly equitable price. 7,700 on FanDuel. No issue with you going back there again. But again, everything is relative to ownership. Right now we have Spencer Dinwiddie projected at 31%. That's quite a number. That doesn't feel too bad. We have D'Angelo Russell at 28. I guess I haven't specifically alluded to him yet. I think he's great. Again, the ownership, as listed in front of me, is not as is giving the public more credit than I did. I'll put it that way. These numbers are not as strongly reacting to the game one successes and failures as you might think. They are significantly. You still have Dinwiddie at 31%, and that has him on a 2-game slate as like the 11th most owned player. Where, points per dollar and at that price, he should be higher. He should probably be 5, 6, 7 in that range. But there's still some reasonable ownership on other guys. It says 20% on Jared Allen right here. Again, if Embiid plays, I'm just going to want 0. You need so many things to go the right way for that to work out. There's nothing wrong with playing him. He's $4,500 on DraftKings. So, you're certainly, not investing that much so that a failure destroys you. But it's a legit bad spot, and I just don't think necessarily the minutes are there. Though, all right, so Ed Davis will play. And Jared Dudley will not. So, now our real question is, do we think Rondé Hollis-Jefferson plays? And I have several things pulled up here, so I'm going to take a moment of silence as I look at some old rotations for the games where Rondé got his random 27 minutes, and the previous games this year against the Nets and the 76ers, and this last game. And now I'm going to say whether or not I think Rondé Hollis-Jefferson steps on the court. Yeah, it is my guess that Rondé still does not play. He has been consistently behind in the rotation. Rodions Kurucs, he's obviously been consistently in the rotation behind Ed Davis. He's obviously consistently in the rotation behind Jared Allen. There are simply enough minutes to go to those guys that I would, if you were giving me odds right now, I'd say 3-1 against still Rondé Hollis-Jefferson stepping on the court. We do have to find something to do with those 28 minutes from Jared Dudley, but, and this is just one example, he, came in directly and replaced and played large shifts for Rodions Kurucs, who played less than 13 minutes. They can play Rodions Kurucs 19 minutes. They can take some of that extra time, go a little smaller, give some of that extra time to Caris LeVert. So I would say maybe 2-1 against that he steps on the court. And even if he steps on the court, I have to presume he's not going to get so many minutes that it's brilliant here. I don't think he's out of play because it's a 2-game slate, and if I say there's a 33% chance he plays, there's a 10% chance he plays 25 minutes, and of that, there's a 10% chance of that he scores 40 fantasy points and wins you $100,000. Like, the upside conclusion is there enough that you can run him. You certainly want Joel Embiid to be in the event that you want to run Rondé Hollis-Jefferson. So my level of interest would be somewhat inversely proportional there. But my best guess is that it turns into more minutes for a combination of Jared Allen, who played 10, Joe Harris, who played 30, and they're happy to give 36, Rodions Kurucs, who played 13, who they can give 18, Caris LeVert, who played 23 and played well. They could just bump him up to 27. My guess is that they don't give that a shot in the playoffs. Let's see. Harrell or Draymond for a DK GPP? I would probably stick with Harrell. I like the situation a little bit better for him. It's just a team in which the pace in that game is significant. Obviously, they're both in the same game, but I just foresee him having a little bit more opportunity, and I do think the Draymond production is tied to how well Cousins does, and I do think that was a very low-end performance out of DeMarcus Cousins in that last game. I'm disinclined to play Cousins and Draymond in the same lineup for that reason. You certainly can. It's a 2-game slate. Feel free. But there's a strong negative correlation between those two right now. Thoughts on Ivica Zubac on DK? On the very edge of playable. Had a good game against Cousins and the Warriors earlier this year. He's not out of play, but the most likely scenario is him again seeing a fairly nominal amount of time and giving way to Harrell. He did play 10 minutes. I had it right in that last game, and that's obviously not enough to get a lot done. Another nice picture of that Joel Embiid checkmark starting / game time decision notification. Yeah, I've worked for DFS sites for years, and we frequently have conversations like, hey, let's do this, and let's put in a weather indicator and starting check marks and this and designations, and it's like, okay, but the more information you put out there, the more information you're responsible for. So, right now FanDuel says that Joel Embiid is starting and a game time decision. Thanks. Like, that pisses people off. And again, it's not your job. You're hosting contests. People want news. There's a site called Twitter, another one called Google. Do you need one of the Clippers? Harold Lure Gallo, you specifically asked. No. You obviously can. I can see a successful lineup not having any Clippers in it. If you were telling me I had to completely expurgate a team, it's probably the Clippers. Just because it's not hard to imagine they just get absolutely demolished and nobody quite gets there. And if you're playing on DK, outside of Harrell, who again can just get in some foul trouble on Cousins, there's no one who's priced quite as brilliantly on FanDuel, so on DraftKings rather. So if you end up with a lineup with no Clippers in it, I don't think it's a dead in the water lineup. But it would be surprising for me if, again, most likely, Harrell or Lou didn't come up with a decent game. You're playing in a 20 entry max. Is it the smart play to completely fade a 56% owned Clay? Or better to just go ownership on him and limit his ownership to 20%? Keeping in mind that MME is not, has never been, and most likely will never be unless I change careers, my specialty, I would be more inclined to just let it go all the way. If I don't, and again, you need to be comfortable just pissing away the night if he scores 50. Doc has done well against him historically. They've done well against the line. Like they've really tried to navigate so that isn't the thing that gets them. And if you looked at I don't have it up in front of me, but I have a feeling if you looked at Klay Thompson against the Clippers, I can remember one very good game where I think he's had a 50 burger, and then you're going to have a whole smattering of 25s and 30s. So I doubt it kills you. So when you're asking me what the smart play is, there's no such thing as an inherently smart play between playing 0% Clay and 20% Clay. I think most people would tell you to play the 20% Clay to leave yourself some outs if he goes off and still have some active lineups, and that's perfectly valid and reasonable strategy. I probably just cut bait. Back when I played again, even if I was playing usually one lineup per site, although there were times I'd win 100 tickets and have to build 100 lineups, frequently we just full fade guys and go, you know what, I've watched this, I've seen this tape enough, this is not good for this guy, he's going to be popular, screw it, he's just going in none of my lineups on any of these sites, even where he's cheap. So I'm more of a full fade guy, but you just need to be able to accept the consequences of that. Thoughts on Graham? Graham of the Nets we're talking about. I think he played 17 minutes or something. Yeah, so Trevion Graham played 17 minutes in that game. Another reasonably likely candidate to pick up some of that. Jared, I didn't mention him, but another guy who played 17 minutes could play 21. Like, they ran a 10-man rotation. I imagine they shrink it to 9 before going to Rondé Hollis-Jefferson. I'm not sure, but it's worth pointing out that, again, in that last game, of those 10 people, one of them played 10 minutes, one played 13, one played 17. So, just stepping back from it a little bit, I get the desire to want to play Rondé. Rondé's a very good fantasy basketball player. Really talented guy. It's a little weird that he wasn't in the rotation for a lot of this year. He's not the best guy on the team, but he's in the top 10. But it would be really strange for them in game 1 to say, okay, we're going to give 10 minutes to Jared Allen and 13 to Kurux and 17 to Graham and 0 to Rondé. And then in the second game now he's going to leapfrog 4 of those guys as far as minutes distribution and get 25. Could it happen? Sure. Kenny Atkinson's a bit of a jerk when it comes to stuff like this. Dudley being out helps a lot. Ed Davis, ankle, I think it is. That's That's not ideal. Maybe they don't want to run him out there a billion minutes. So maybe he gets a shift and does really well and gets a longer shift in the second half. But, I would still go with greater than 50%. He does not touch the court. And then even if he touches the court, do you get enough out of him in a world of $3,700 Ed Davis and $4,200 on DK Boban where, yeah, he was the value play. So, I get wanting to go there. I don't think it ends up being smart to massively expose yourself to that situation at the end of the day. JaMychal Green and Mike Scott thoughts. Yeah, so obviously the time for Mike Scott extremely significant. Him getting 32 minutes in the first game was unexpected by a lot of people, certainly including myself. That has a good bit to do with J.J. Redick fouling out, and then keep in mind that James Ennis, they've said basically, is going to play 12 minutes in this game, and he obviously played 0 minutes in game 1. So I'm fine with Mike Scott. $4,200 on FanDuel is a perfectly reasonable price. $3,400 on DK is a perfectly reasonable price. I have him for 23 minutes right now. That's also counting the fact that they gave Jonah Bolden 5 minutes. So I have him for 23. I'd be shocked if he saw 30 again with all the changes to this lineup, assuming Embiid plays. And there is a real floor there. Seeing 16 minutes out of Mike Scott is not impossible. So I have some real concern there. Do with that what you will. Hopefully I give you the full picture. The other one you asked about there was JaMychal Green. Gallo was struggling a little bit, and I think that has something to do with it, but there wasn't any really significant foul trouble on the Clippers. JaMychal Green, actually, I think, may have had the most fouls on the team. I think he and Lou had 4, but it is not a great matchup for him, and again, you're looking to bang out a ceiling. I'm probably a little more comfortable with JaMychal Green than Mike Scott, but neither of them are guys I would want to prioritize at their prices. Lou Williams or Simmons, yeah? I have Simmons projected for 1 more fantasy point. As far as their ownership is currently projected, we have Lou Williams at 32. We have Ben Simmons at 49, which, if that's the case, bravo. So talking about, the Warriors a little bit more there, it's important to look at how many shots everybody took, real specifically, because Klay took 14 shots, Cousins took 12 in his 21 minutes. I want to repeat that again. Draymond took 12. Curry and Durant each took exactly 16. So, first of all, kudos to them for a very even-handed offense. That's a brilliant thing when you can manage a team to do that. Literally, they had 5 starters, and they all took 12 to 16 shots. That's pretty great. The second thing you'd point out, though, is that's the exact same number of shots for Durant and Curry. And Durant's well cheaper. On FanDuel, Durant's or on DK, Durant's down to $8,000. There is a ceiling there. He's generally going to shoot a similar percentage to Curry. Now, Curry got 15 rebounds. I don't even know. I went back and counted. There were 15 of them. The rest of the line is an above average line. But him, making 8 out of 12 3-pointers, it's about 1 more than you'd expect in what's an excellent matchup for him. Did about what you expect at the line, but shot extremely well, and that 15 rebounds would normally be, 5. So, I have him projected higher than Durant. Before the first game, I said I have Steph likely to go higher than Durant because of the effect of Cousins. I won't rehash the entire situation, but I do expect him to outscore Kevin Durant. The differential between the two of them over the course of the series will be less than it was right here. Do I think Embiid will play Allen off the floor again? Yes, if Embiid and Allen start, I expect Allen to see limited time. Again, the last 3 games he started against Joel Embiid, he has played 16, 9, and 10 minutes. So if they both start, yes, I would probably avoid it. There is a minor cookie with Dudleys, with Milk Duds being out there. 4 Nets in a single lineup on FanDuel, good or bad? It's pretty good. Nets are priced too good on FanDuel. Ed Davis, Damari Carroll, Spencer Dinwiddie are 3 guys I think you would want in a lot of lineups. The fourth one, you can certainly play D'Angelo Russell. You can certainly play Karis LeVert. I like both those guys quite a bit. I generally think playing more than one of, and I said this before the first game, Dinwiddie, Russell, and LeVert in a single lineup wouldn't be my first inclination, but I'd almost certainly try to have one. Dinwiddie's going to be my favorite. Past that, it's a little bit interesting. So I imagine 3 would be the sweet spot for me a lot of the time. DeMarre Carroll, who plays small forward, led the team in minutes. They treat him very like Iguodala, and they're actually not incredibly dissimilar basketball players. He's not as good as Andre Iguodala, certainly not height of his powers Andre Iguodala, but DeMarre Carroll's good, and getting 34 minutes in for $4,000 or $4,400 on DK is just fine in a good matchup. So I like DeMarre Carroll a lot. Ed Davis has droppable 3,700 on FanDuel, sort of screams out to be played there. So I imagine I would have 3 a lot, and so obviously I can't say that 4 is an outlandish and or terrible idea. Boban or Ed Davis on DK in a GPP. Yeah, so to give you an idea of, relative price, again, an $1,800 difference between those two guys on FanDuel. And you can play them both, by the way, if you want, which you may want to do anyway. Even with Embiid in, Boban makes a claim at being the best center on FanDuel. Let's talk about center on FanDuel for a little bit, just because it'll bring up some other interesting things to talk about. And I'm hoping we're basically going to cover the whole slate with me just bouncing the hell around here. So you have Embiid at 11K. You can obviously play him. Again, I have concerns. 24 minutes is not a lot of minutes, and is not going to produce 55 and 24 minutes in general. I'd probably project him for 47 in 24 minutes. This is nearly a 2-point-a-minute situation for him, but he's also not healthy, and so leave that it is. DeMarcus Cousins, you can absolutely do that for 9K on FanDuel. Again, very possibly the highest scoring center on the night. If Embiid sits, has probably a greater than 50% chance of being the highest scoring center on the night, maybe even higher than that. Because after that, it goes down real quick. Jared Allen, who would become very much in play in the event that Embiid is out. Boban, who would become very much in play in the event that Embiid is out, and is still not out of play at $5,500 right now. Because if you don't want to pay for Embiid, and you want to pay $9,000 for Cousins, you're playing a couple other Warriors or what have you. If Embiid's in, we don't want to play Jared Allen. Boban as a backup, you could see something very similar to last game, which was about what you would expect out of him, about 25 fantasy points for $5,000. That might be the number. You don't want to pay Zubac at $4,800, and after that you have Andrew Bogut, who barely played, Monroe, Bell, Looney, Delgado. Yeah. So, I know it's 2 games late, but center pretty damn thin. Butler and Simmons over Embiid in a single lineup. That is currently what I have on DraftKings for the one lineup that I've been tinkering with. Boban, even if Embiid plays, certainly on DK. We have no reason to think that he won't play significant time at his 4,200. He's not a must. If Embiid's out, he pretty much becomes a must on DK. I think you 100% it at that point. FanDuel, yeah, you can still do it, as I was just describing. Hopefully people are watching the pre-games a little bit and keeping an eye on things for me, because again, I am hosting the show. One lineup on FanDuel, who is your center? That's a very succinct question. Right now, it's going to be either Boban or Cousins. If Embiid's in, it's going to be Embiid or Cousins, probably. If Embiid is out, probably Jared Allen. And roll that out there. Probably Boban. Yeah, I don't think I can get away from Boban if Embiid is out, just for the other way it sucks. But yeah, some Jared Allen on DK is the big thing you're going to want to do in the event. Negative correlation rostering LeVert and Dinwiddie in the same lineup. Not really. Again, whenever there's positive and negative correlation in many different ways between all players. So they have both positive and negative correlation. One of them is they're both, bench scorers who are coming in, and it's unlikely they both get hot, but if there's overtime, they each see extra minutes, and they're both getting extra minutes because Dudley's out, and if the yada yada. So, Yes, I think they're overall net negative. I don't think your Dinwiddie shares get better when LeVert comes in. I don't think your LeVert shares get better when Dinwiddie comes in. That being said, they're both cheap enough, and it's a 2-game slate. I really don't give a shit. Kurucs or JaMychal Green on DK? Yeah. Kurucs on the tangential edge of being playable at this point. Yeah, right now between like Kurucs and Rondae, I'd have to think about it for a while, but it would probably be Kurucs for me at this point. I would probably still JaMychal Green at this point. Given 150 lineups, how much Embiid would you have if there is no news before lock? I would have 0. There's just too many ways it fails, and I have a feeling he would still be like 10% owned. So if there's no news before lock, we'll say there's a 50% chance he doesn't play at all. And then what percent chance it doesn't go that well relative to the other centers. If there was no news before lock, which, again, we're 17 minutes out, kids. And as we get closer to lock, if you get Embiid in, we're getting late enough now that I'm going to kind of like him again. And it sucks, but that's running a 2-game slate in the world we live in. It's really a situation where if they say Embiid was in 20 minutes ago, I would be well under the field. If they say Embiid is in 5 minutes from now, I would be well over the field. That's it's just how you have to play it. A little frustrating for me because it's not talking about basketball. It's just random game theory. Playing Curry, Durant, and Cousins in the same lineup on FanDuel. Thoughts? I think it's fine. Is it okay to roster Green and Cousins together? Yes, it's okay. Again, I don't think they positively correlate, but especially on DK where they're 61 and 7100, those prices are cheap enough they can easily exceed them. It's a 2-game slate, so when you're looking at a 12-game slate and there's 350 viable players in the player pool, that's absolutely not the correct math, by the way. On a 12-game slate, there's about 150 viable players in the player pool. There's almost always a chance that you'd come up with a play that doesn't have the negative correlation of 2 guys who might play center for the same team. On a 2-game slate, you just can't do that. You're going to have guys who negatively correlate. So, yes, it's fine. On FanDuel in one lineup, do you start both Simmons or Butler or pick only one? On FanDuel, I imagine I end up with one more often than not. I'm fine playing Simmons instead of, say, Curry. And then you can get away from Butler and play Iggy and Clay and Lou, 2 of those 3. That feels fine. So I imagine more frequently I end up that way. It is worth, considering stacking a game. I won't go through my whole spiel again, but 2-game slates, yeah, really being all the hell over a game is not a bad idea. Is Mike Scott an option if Embiid is out? Yes, he's much more an option if Embiid is out. He'll play time at the 4 and the 5. I actually like him quite a bit at 4,200 and 3,400 in lower ownership if Embiid is out. If Embiid is in, he's still an option. Embiid played last game. Mike Scott played 32 goddamn minutes. So, keep that in mind. Thoughts on Shamet from the Clippers at 3,600? If not, any pivots at 3,600? I imagine it's going to be Shamet, and I don't feel good about it, but 36 is 36. Actually, it might be Mike Scott right now. We have to, and also when talking about Boban, I still like him a lot, but keep in mind that Bolden is going to play more than 5 minutes this game, probably. So, you should be a little more hesitant for that reason. I think right now I would still Mike Scott over Landry Shamet. It's very close for me. They're in that same ballpark, and no, it's those 2 guys. I'm not going to Kurucs or Rondae or some of those other guys. If no news on Embiid, would you play more Allen or fade him along with Embiid? Same thing with Allen. You need enough things to go right that if I know Embiid is out, I think the calculus works out right on DK. I really like playing like Boban and Allen as your 2 centers, stacking up some other places. That makes a lot of sense to me. With no news, I don't think we will have no news, but I think it's fine. LeVert or Redick in a DK GPP? I'm assuming you already have Dinwiddie, which would make it a close question for me. If you don't have Dinwiddie or Russell, then pretty clearly LeVert for me. Again, Dudley being out, I do expect to mean a few minutes for him. Looked really good last game. Only played 23 minutes. I do think they bumped that number up here. Iguodala, I expect to see a few less minutes. That should be noted. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to... Iggy is a completely different player in the playoffs. I've ridden him to playoff greatness for a while. Sure, it doesn't always work, and these prices are a little on the big gas. You may not need him, but he's been good to me. Yeah, I absolutely love Iggy. It's just, you're paying the same price for him and Ed Davis and Boban, and his extra time was increased by the fouling out of Cousins, and the ejection of Durant mattered for a minute or two, and so I'm fine with Iggy. You can have any amount of Iguodala. I don't mind. Last game was a little bit better than he's going to do in general. More messages. Clay and Redick or Graham and Durant on FanDuel? Without knowing your other punts, I suspect that I would play Graham and Durant more often there. I really don't like Graham's chances of getting there. Not impossible, obviously. Minutes could certainly come up, but yeah. Beverly on DK, yeah, I'm absolutely fine with that. They need him out there, and he's a dog. It'll be interesting to see if they change up their defense this time. I don't think they do, based on Doc tends to be a bit tenacious and a bit stuck in his rut, so I think he keeps him on Durant, which is one of the reasons I'm not full-blown play Kevin Durant here, because I do suspect he'll be in still what's kind of a tougher matchup for him than what Steph has to deal with, so I do think it's a little more likely Steph goes off again. So even with a cheaper Durant, I'm kind of ambivalent between the two of them if their ownership is going to be as similar as we currently have indicated, because I think that they keep Beverly there. Now, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander did most of the defending, if we want to call it that, on Steph Curry. And again, I suspect that Steph doesn't have quite the game he does. But because, if I thought they were actually going to, take Beverly and have him sit on Steph Curry this game, which isn't impossible, that wouldn't shock me. But I think it's more likely that they stick with the same game plan, even though it didn't work that well, based on just what Doc's done in the playoffs for years over many teams. So for that reason, I'm still fairly ambivalent on those two guys. No super strong take there. Dinwiddie or LeVert in one lineup, absent further context, I would rather play Dinwiddie. You got 9 extra minutes. What happened to Joe Harris last game? He started off and disappeared. Thoughts on him tonight? He's fine in tournaments. I like Dudley being out for him. I think he probably now gets 32 or 33 minutes. He's one of the guys who they have always minuted up over the course of the year whenever possible. So I'm fine with him in tournaments. He just doesn't profile well compared next to all the other 4K value plays, whether you're talking about, Boban or Iguodala or DeMar Carroll. But he could certainly get there. It's not the best spot for him, hasn't, performed, but he's a guy who's going to play 30-something minutes in a reasonably fast game. Again, the second game, all things are relative, so this is the slow game of the evening. But I'm absolutely fine with Joe Harris in tournaments. He's just a guy based on 2-game slate. The ownership will be low enough. He makes sense to get in there. I legit like him at his ownership. If Embiid is announced in with 5 minutes to go left, what % are you targeting on DK? Yeah, I'm really of two minds on the subject. If they say, Embiid is playing and starting 5 minutes from now, 4 minutes before lock, I don't know. It has a lot to do with everything else going on in those lineups, how many other Sixers you have, whether or not you're going to Jared Allen, who now takes one of the center spot. There are a lot of related math and selection issues to answer that question quite so simply. But if forced to just reduce it down to an integer like that, 50. Embiid in. There you go. So there you go. Embiid in with 8 minutes to go. I've tried to paint as complete a picture of the situation as I can. I'm absolutely fine with playing any amount of him. I am absolutely fine with playing very, very little. Certainly less excited about Boban on FanDuel now. Certainly less excited about Mike Scott, who I do think minutes come down. A little more worried about Boban. A few more minutes are, going to go to Bolden, I expect. Still fine with Boban on DK, however much you want to run him out there. Still fine with Embiid anywhere you want to do that. But, again, last game was a bit more of a ceiling. And it comes down to a very interesting ownership question there. More importantly, Hamidou Diallo won't play tomorrow, so that's obviously critical. Single line DK, do you play Embiid? No. I don't think in my first lineup on DK right now I would play Embiid. I get doing it. It's right, at 8 or 9 minutes before lock as opposed to, 5 as opposed to 15 is right about the line where I think he will be. And we'll have a fun game of Daddy Like in 8 minutes. I think Embiid will be 34-35% owned. That's high enough for me. I don't think I get there. I probably play Butler and Simmons. Maybe Butler, Simmons, and Boban. I imagine my centers are Boban and Cousins or something like that. Does that hurt Simmons Butler? Absolutely. Simmons and Butler are much better if Embiid is out. Absolutely. Simmons, I still have projected for a little bit north of 40. And Ben Simmons played, all 4 games against the Nets this year, next to Joel Embiid, who had very good games, and Simmons exceeded 40 in 3 of those games and 50 in one of those games. I still like Simmons quite a bit. But, he loses like a 7 points of projection. Like, Ben Simmons goes from having like a 48-point projection to like a 41-point projection with Embiid in. Clay and Durant or Butler and Gallo? Clay and Durant. Simmons or Butler on DK? Yeah, it's close. It is a better matchup for Butler. He's produced better against the Nets, and he has slogged, with the exception of the last game in the regular season. He's beaten the shit out of the Nets across several teams for years. He just whomps on the Nets, even irrelevant whomping on Nets teams that aren't anything like this one. That's been a real thing. I probably play Simmons in one lineup for what I expect to be lower ownership. I would expect Butler to be projected a little bit higher. Kurik starting, that's as expected. He's started, 20 games in a row. They've messed around with the other starters a little bit, but Kuriks has been locked in at the 4 for a pretty extended period of time. But thank you for reporting and confirming that we are staying as we have been. 5 minutes, everybody. Yeah, everyone's starting who we expected, so there should be no additional news. Looking for any last-minute questions. All you asked for is 7 minutes for RHJ and not just a 0. Sure. Any Redick, much better with Embiid in on DK. And I don't expect as much foul trouble. Like, I think, I have Redick in that same class as Joe Harris, as guys who have a ceiling whose ownership will be unnaturally depressed. I like them both less than, say, Spencer Dinwiddie again, but, I'm fine with that. Is Embiid fadeable? Yes, I think he's very fadeable. Guys aren't fadeable when they're, like, again, last game he had 56 fantasy points, 58 fantasy points, which is great. He played 24 minutes. And he may play more minutes this game, but if he plays 24 minutes again, I'd expect him to have somewhere in the realm of 40 fantasy points or 45 fantasy points. And he's the most expensive player on the slate at $9,800. So he's going to be passed by several guys who cost less than him. Curry or Durant or Russell or Simmons or Butler or a number of other guys who could hurt. So yes, I think he is very fadeable. There's a real chance he's the highest scoring player on the slate. But yeah, he's obviously very, very fadeable. There are guys who cost $1,000, $2,000, $2,500 less than him with similar upside. Boban or Ed Davis on DK and a GPP. I'd be a little more inclined toward Boban. Simmons, Butler, Looney, or Shea, Iggy, Embiid, FanDuel GPB. Simmons, Butler, Looney. Harris or Iggy on DK. I'll go with Harris. It's close. That's two people asked the same question back to back. And it's a good question. I had to think about it, and I come in very close on it. And again, keep in mind on DK, you have late swap. Put your guys playing in the late game down on the bottom line. I'm just make sure these are the guys I want from this game, and put them in at the top, and then readdress the situation in an hour and a half. Have yourself a nice scone. Maybe a latte. Go along with that. Alright, I'm going into full looking at alerts mode, although I find it unlikely much else will change in the interim. Boogie or Simmons straight up? I really like both those plays, and I'm projected within a point. So it's just going to come down to game correlation for me. KD or Russell? I'd probably go Russell for the ownership at this point if that projects out about how we expect. Harrell, Green, or Harris, DK, GPP. I'd still run Montrez in most situations. 90 seconds. The 500K on DraftKings is not quite going to fill. For what it's worth. Currently at 38 out of 39,000, but I don't think that would make me want to enter it a billion times or something. A couple of the smaller tournaments not going to fill either. There's a 15K, $4 entry, 20 entry max. The 4-point play isn't going to overlay, but it's only going to rank 2 or 3% if I'm eyeballing the math there correctly. Coming down to it. Yeah, it looks like that contest has started at 38.1 thousand entries out of 39.2 thousand entries. So that's, let's see, 38.1 thousand times 15 is 57,100 or 571,000. So they raked 14.2% as opposed to their standard 15 or 16% nut. So saved yourself a little rake in the main event on DK. All right, let us look at some DraftKings ownership. Where is it? There's got to be an entry in that. Yeah, there it is. Spencer Dinwiddie, 24%. Zang. Boban, 15%. Zang. Simmons, 43. Butler, 41. Interesting. So Simmons even slightly higher owned. But the real question is, what will Embiid be owned? 32. I missed it by, what, 2%? What did I say? 34? So yeah, that's fun. I feel good about getting that right on based on the 8.5 minute time frame or whatever. But yeah, I don't have a strong take on that. If you have some of the 32% own Joel Embiid, I think it's fine. That's not a massive ownership on a 2-game slate. 68% of the field faded him. but that's third highest owned player on the slate. So Simmons highest owned, 43%. Butler, 41%. Embiid, 32%. DeMar Carroll, 30%. That's, a bit higher than I'd like to see. Tobias Harris, 29%. That's a bit higher than I'd like to see. LeVert, 28%. Dinwiddie, 24%. That feels good. I'm a big fan of three-quarters people not playing Dinwiddie. Redick, 23%. Russell, 22%. That feels good. Ed Davis, 22%. Boban, 15%. Joe Harris, 14%. Jared Allen, still 12%. Mike Scott, 9%. Rondé Hollis Jefferson, 6%. Some people will just not give up hope. But Dudley out and Embiid in, so you're, 2 of the 5 things you need to happen to get Embiid in there. TJ McConnell, 2%. Trevion Graham, 0.9. Jonah Bolden, 0.7. James Ennis, 0.3 in his 12 minutes. Jonathan Simmons, 0.22. Shabazz Napier, 0.21. Greg Monroe, 0.15. Jared Dudley, 0.14. Congratulations. You played yourself. So, between the overlay and then that 1/7 of 1%, just chopping off bits of rake left and right. So yeah, let's post some more screenshots tonight. I'm certainly looking forward to them. It's been fun and successful so far. People have been fun. I was just going to sort of go through the games, but I think that sort of having a more free-form discussion and bouncing around is going to hopefully be more valuable. I don't know. Doing the best I can. So, yeah, send me your hatred for not liking Luke Kennard the other night, or send me your pleasure when things go your way. I will be back again tomorrow. Pretty much going to run it out there every day. There's 2+ games because, Daddy's got to eat. So there we are. Bon chance, mes amis. Good luck tonight.